Looks like we have a pretty full room, so I guess I'll start a little bit early because I don't know that we're going to be able to get anybody else in here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Pi World, and welcome to Leveraging Pi Vision Extensibility. My name is Robert Schmitz. I work in the Philadelphia office out here in OSIsoft, and I'm one of the product support engineers. So this class, or this tech talk, I'm going to be doing a lot of live coding, kind of switching between some slides and my VM. I'm going to be doing a lot of switching between slides and my VM here, just to kind of show you in live, how we actually make some symbols, and we'll be going through a couple of quick examples. So this is really meant to be kind of an introduction to Pi Vision Extensibility. There are online classes out on Pi Square for all of you users who want to kind of take this a little bit further. This is going to rehash a fair bit of the material from that. But the questions we're planning on answering today is just how do we add a custom symbol in general to Pi Vision? How do we get data into that custom symbol? How can we leverage kind of other libraries? So think HiCharts, D3 libraries, Angular, or AmCharts libraries, to avoid kind of starting custom symbols from scratch for those people who don't want to, basically be starting from scratch every time. And then every time I've run this, I've run a little bit short. Sometimes I run a little bit over. But if we have some time, I'm hoping to get into how to get some data from other sources other than Pi, how to make HTTP requests just with Pi Vision symbols so you can get data from other sources as well. The other thing I just kind of want to mention, as I'm going through this, I'm going to be kind of stopping and asking questions because there are a couple of phases. So if you have any questions sort of in the middle of this, it's important to kind of help clear those up before we move on to kind of the next sections because it builds on itself. All right, though. So just getting started, adding a symbol to Pi Vision. There are a couple of sort of basic steps that we need. First, everyone in their Pi Vision installation has a folder, that Pi Home 64 folder. All of the scripts for Pi Vision, the actual application, are held within there. If you want to add a custom symbol, you need to add this ext folder under Pi Vision, scripts, app, editor, symbols. There's going to be a separate folder for extensibility symbols. Once you have created that folder, new files that you place into that are going to be kind of loaded in by Pi Vision and attempted to be registered as symbols. To create a symbol, you really need two files. The first one being kind of your logic file, the actual JavaScript or TypeScript that you need for the logic of your symbol, and then a layout file or an HTML file that describes how that data is going to be displayed, how that symbol is going to be displayed in the web browser itself. One thing I want to note is that you must follow this naming convention, this SYM dash whatever you want your symbol name to be, .js, and then sim dash whatever your symbol name is, dash template for the actual layout of your file itself. The third kind of thing we need is just some initialization code. I know probably not the biggest on the screen for you at the moment, but we'll get into it in my VM a little bit more. So this initialization code is kind of the same across all Pi Vision symbols. It's going to be kind of your boilerplate code that everything's going to need just to get something up and registered and into, up and registered as a symbol in Pi Vision. And this code is, readily available in all of in the documentation for Pi Vision Extensibility. And also, if anybody, I see a lot of people are taking pictures.
Downloadable?
Pardon?
Can we download any of this?
Yeah, this is all available in the documentation. You can copy it, paste it right out of there. But this whole talk is going to be recorded. So if you want to take a look at the slides after, or want to have some of my commentary on this, you can always take a look at this after the fact. But that's just kind of the three things we need to get registered and get going. So let's make a symbol in Pi Vision. So I'm hopping over here just to a VM that we have on our own OSIsoft domain. One of my VMs that I have just set up for this course. In here, I'm mostly going to be working in Visual Studio Code. This is our kind of initial boilerplate code. This is the initial code that we need to just kind of start any custom symbol whatsoever. I tend to actually, let's take a step back. I just kind of want to show you that I don't have any tricks up my sleeve here. So what I'm opening up right now is just that ext folder. I've already created it because I've run through this talk a couple of times. But under PyVision, scripts, app editor, symbols, here's where a lot of the native code for all of the existing PyVision symbols that you know and love exists. Under this ext folder, these are going to be our extensible symbols. These are going to be the new ones that we add. I have a little bit of kind of stuff here. Kind of the symbols already created in case we run into any issues. But one of the things I do have here is just kind of this symbol template.txt. This is, like I was saying, kind of the boilerplate code to get everything started. The other thing I kind of wanted to note here is that there's a libraries folder for if you want to download some external JavaScript or other libraries for leveraging other existing kind of symbols. I've already went ahead and downloaded a couple of the AmChartsJS libraries here for kind of use later in this course because I didn't know how finicky the Wi-Fi was going to be here. So what I have open in Visual Studio Code here is just that boilerplate code. We're going to go ahead and copy and paste this and make a new symbol. Sure. I'm sorry. Come again? So all I've done so far is just take that boilerplate code, copy and paste it into a new file, and then we've named that according to the kind of standard naming conventions, that SYM dash, and I've named my symbol simple value 2 here. In the code here, we have this type name, and that is going to be what the actual tooltip pop-up is when you hover over that symbol in PyVision. So you kind of want to have this name match whatever your symbol name is, just to kind of keep things consistent. So I'll go ahead and save that. And then the second thing we need is that kind of layout file, what we're actually going to look at in PyVision itself. So for those of you guys who are familiar with HTML and CSS, this will probably seem pretty familiar to you. I'm just making a new div here, a new kind of container for something to hold data in the browser, in an HTML, in the browser. Let's just do something simple. We'll go with hello world. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. And again, we're going to be using that same kind of naming convention that we were using before. So that's simple value 2, and then template.html. And then you can see we also get a little bit of nice syntax highlighting in here for the HTML file. Those HTML tags are now highlighted. And then kind of similarly over in the JS file, we have all our variable names are in light blue. Special words are in that dark blue. This is my personal preference using Visual Studio Code. I'd recommend it if you guys are just getting started. Tends to help cut down on syntax errors. But you can also use something as simple as Notepad, because these are all just text files at the end of the day. So hopping over into PyVision here. We'll again just start from kind of the main page, just so you show there's no tricks up my sleeve. So I have this PyVision display, or PyVision installation just kind of local to this VM, which is why I'm using localhost/PyVision for this, and why it's not accepting that kind of security certificate up in the corner. But let me just refresh this page real quick. All right. Yeah. Not sure why it's taken so long, but just to kind of give you an introduction of, there we go. We'll go ahead and create a new display. And over on the left-hand side here, it's still loading up this guy. But over on the left-hand side here, you have your symbols that you kind of know and love, all of the trends, the the new value symbols, the bar charts, but you also have a couple of these wrench and hammer, or wrench and screwdriver type symbols. These are all of the default kind of custom symbols. Whenever you create a new one, it will automatically come up with that kind of symbol. You can change that as needed, but kind of for the purposes of this, we're going to gloss over that. And you see as I'm hovering these, we have different actual tooltips, and that's just being populated from that type name that we gave for the symbol. So in my case, we had simple value 2 was the one I just created. I'm going to add just kind of any tag to it. I'll drag it over and make a new symbol, and then I'll go ahead and make the background a little bit lighter. And we see that we just have that hello world that I typed in as part of our actual display file. That's all that's in there. You saw that I dragged it over with a sinusoid tag, but so far we're not kind of getting a hook into that tag's data. All we're doing is just displaying the words hello world. So just to kind of recap, the 3 things we did for this symbol were create that ext folder, create 2 files, the JavaScript file or logic file for the symbol, the HTML file, kind of the layout, which all it contains is hello world. We followed our naming conventions, and then we used that boilerplate code to just get a symbol up and registered. Just as kind of a quick cheat sheet here, as I mentioned, the symbol name just matches that type name. The height and width and number of pixels is under that return there. And then we'll get into this a little bit later, but how many tags does a symbol consume is just kind of controlled by this enum here, that data source behavior.single just kind of means that it consumes a single tag. You could also have symbols that contain multiple tags. Think of your kind of standard trend symbols where you'd be trending multiple tags on a single object. And then sort of the 4th step that we did was add a little bit of code to our layout file. And as long as it's valid HTML, or just about any valid HTML, we can get that to run. All right. So do we have any questions so far before we start getting on, or what questions do we have before we start getting in Pi data into our symbol? Yes?
Can you connect your symbols to data other than Pi tags?
So yeah, the question was, can you connect your symbols to things other than Pi tags? And the answer is yes. If you can make a request to it from your symbol, from your JavaScript file, you could get data from other data sources. So I have a couple of slides here on making HTML requests to, in my case, the Pi Web API. But if you could make an HTTP request to some other web resource, you could get data from that as well.
Do you have any sort of guidance on max number of tags you would recommend putting in a custom symbol? The fewer the better.
Yeah. So the question is there any recommendation on the max number of tags to put in a custom symbol? And to be honest, it would probably be the same for whatever a native symbol is. I don't know that I've ever heard a number to that, though, so I can't really speak to that.
Can you use a TypeScript for this?
So I know I mentioned TypeScript earlier. For PiVision 3.x, the kind of currently released version, it only accepts valid JavaScript. There is, for those of you who took the Vision 4.x extensibility class last year, that should accept TypeScript. And so you could do a superset of everything that's valid in JavaScript should be valid in TypeScript. So you should be able to kind of work in both of them. All right. Yeah?
When you say valid JavaScript, which version of JavaScript is it valid?
That is, I believe it's E5, if I'm not mistaken, but I can double check on that for you. All right. So let's move on to getting Pi data into our symbol. So getting data into the layout is going to be kind of its own task, and then we're going to break it up and start getting Pi data after that. So how do we actually get data into our symbol? We're going to use some of AngularJS's kind of quote-unquote magic. We're going to add a little bit of fake data to our logic file. We're going to use AngularJS's scope variable to make that fake data available in our logic file, available to the layout file. So moving sort of that information from the JavaScript file into that HTML file. And then once we have it kind of accessible in the HTML file, we can use that scope variable, AngularJS's scope variable, to actually consume that data in the layout file. So let's get started with that. Let's go ahead and save this since I already have a background changed a little bit. All right. So over here, we have again, our JavaScript file. All we want to do is create a little bit of fake data here. I'll go ahead and make a new variable data item. What's today's date? 4/10/2019. And we'll do 10 a.m. just to make sure that it's going to show up. All right. So the second kind of thing, insofar as getting that data item variable, that fake data that we've created, available to our HTML file, we're going to use a AngularJS kind of built-in variable called scope. Scope allows us to move data, kind of make it accessible to multiple different files. So we're going to set this scope variable. We're going to add a few new properties. So I'm going to go with scope.time, and we'll set it equal to that data item .time variable. And we'll do the same for scope.value equals data item .value here. All right. So we've kind of got our first two steps. We have our fake data. We've assigned those kind of pieces of fake data into that scope variable to make it accessible over in our template file. So over in our template file, we can now use a little bit of special syntax. If you guys are familiar with mustache syntax, these double braces allow us to reference anything that is on AngularJS's scope variable in the HTML file. So this scope.time and scope.value, we can just reference as time and value. I'll go ahead and save these two files. All right. So now this kind of brings us to the next important thing for PyVision extensibility. If you're actively developing symbols and kind of changing them on the fly, as many of you guys, if you're familiar with browsers, know, they like to cache information so that it doesn't have to constantly be loading from file. But if we're editing those files and making changes to those custom symbols kind of as we go, and we're in the process of actively developing them, we do need to make sure that the browser is going back to file, back to that actual ext folder, and loading up kind of the new code that we have. So the way we do this, or the way I've come to do this, is hit F12 in most browsers, and we should be able to pull up developer tools. And what this does is it kind of unlocks, at least in Chrome, unlocks kind of a hidden option here to empty cache and reload. This is going to take a minute just to try and get everything back up. But once we do that, PyVision should have our new code that we've added, which it should include that scope variable and that reference to it in the template file, so that when we add a new symbol to our display, it should now be using that new code. So you can see here that we have, I need to work on some of the, let's see, we should be able to spread it out a little bit and get it to go onto 2 lines. OK, so I have it all on a single line. But nonetheless, we have those 2 data items, or the fake data that we kind of put into the symbol, that timestamp of April 10th at 10 a.m., and that value of 100 in here, which is what we originally had in our actual template file here. And the reason that's available is because we added it onto the scope variable here. Let's see if we can, there we go. So just kind of recap. Again, all of the code in the slides here so you guys can kind of go through it yourselves. We added some fake data. We kind of referenced that fake data in a scope variable in our initialization function here. And then we reference the scope variable and the layout using those curly braces reference to reference those objects on the actual scope variable itself. All right, so do we have any questions so far about kind of referencing things in the HTML file from the JavaScript file, or how, kind of what we have done so far? Yes?
Not related to that, but are you, at what point are you going to start using the new versions of Angular? Right now you're using JS.
So because PyVision 3.x, the current released version, is built on AngularJS, it's kind of limited to, like, all PyVision 3.x stuff is going to be using AngularJS. The hope is in kind of future releases to be using, newer versions of Angular 5 and 6 and such, but not in the currently released version are we going to be doing that.
So it's whenever 4 comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know that there's been a set release date yet for that. All right. Any other questions? OK. So let's work on getting PyData into the symbol. So for doing this, we're going to take advantage of some built-in PyVision native functions. So a lot of that boilerplate code, part of what it allows us to access is some of the native PyVision symbol-like functions, one of them being onDataUpdate. So this is kind of a built-in event frame or event handler for PyVision symbols. And when you get a hook into this, when we start using this, it's going to be the exact same way that PyVision symbols that are built by our own developers are using to get, it's the same function they use to get data for their own symbols, for our own symbols. We're going to use that to get PyData for a tag. We're going to do the same kind of second half of the process. We're going to map that to a AngularJS scope variable to make it available in the layout file, and then do that same kind of referencing of that scope variable in the template file to actually display that data for the tag. All right, so let's get started with that. So we are back over here in our JavaScript file. So just by using all this same boilerplate code, we should instantly be able to do this, which is referencing our symbol. We're able to do onDataUpdate, a function, or an event handler rather. And whenever a new data update comes in, we want it to call our yet to be defined data update function. So I'm going to get to this in a second. But all this is saying is whenever a new data update comes in, so every 5 seconds, call a function called data update. So now we'll go ahead and define that function itself. Now, when we get, when onDataUpdate triggers, when that event actually happens, what happens is it also passes us a variable called data. And that's going to be whatever the current value or whatever the most recent value is for the tag or attribute that you've given to the symbol is. So we're going to use that information to kind of work with, to try and massage into our scope variable to then get it into our template file. But to know how to kind of massage it into the scope variable, we kind of have to know what that actual data looks like itself. So what I'm going to do is just kind of use a trick of like JavaScript to log that variable to a file, or rather log that variable to the console in Developer Tools in Chrome, so that we can take a look at that, take a look at kind of what data looks like when it gets sent to PyVision. I'm going to go ahead and save that. We're going to open up Developer Tools again. And then we'll go through that same process of emptying the cache and reloading it from scratch so that we can get the log to console for our symbol in here. There we go. And so we see kind of over here on the right-hand side, I have the console open in Developer Tools. and we can take a look at what the actual data that's being sent to PyVision is. So you see this first update here is just a JSON object. It has the label for our symbol, the name, the path to it. In the case of AF, it would be AF:// and then the actual path to that attribute. The symbol name is just kind of the default symbol name that we give to it, our time and value. And what you'll notice also is in kind of these subsequent updates to the symbol, we're only actually getting back the symbol name, the time, and the value. And these are just kind of an efficiency perspective. Things like your path and your symbol name, or things like your path and your actual name of your PyTag or attribute probably aren't changing all that often. So you only actually get periodically these updates that include all of the information, such as the path and the name. So if you're going to plan on kind of including that in your symbol in some way, make sure that you know that that information won't always be in every update. But in the subsequent ones, we can still sort of see that time and value. And we see just capital T time and capital V value. So we should be able to do kind of a similar thing for our referencing that data in the scope variable. So if we go back to Visual Studio, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our fake data here. And now whenever this updates, what I want to happen is, if there's data, if something is actually being given to us, I want to make scope.time equal data.capital T time. I want to take that time property of the data variable that we're getting back from this event handler. And then same thing for value. I just want to reference the value property of data. So we'll go ahead and save this. And then we will do another empty cache and hard reload over in PyVision. And now we see, if we compare this to the actual kind of value symbol for sinusoid, that we are, in fact, getting the same data as the native symbol, or the actual native symbol for PyVision for sinusoid. We have that value of 94.92 and that same timestamp of 2:07:54 p.m. All right. And again, just to kind of recap, what we did is we added an onData update function, which is PyVision's native event handler for symbols. We logged it to console just to kind of get a better idea of what that format is, how it's coming in. We noticed that most updates are just that symbol name, that value, and the time for the tag that, or the attribute that we've associated with the symbol. And that periodically we're getting these kind of metadata updates that'll include other information like units in the case of AF attributes, or the path, the actual like tag or attribute name. Using kind of that information, we were able to massage that into the scope variable and just set it equal to what's coming in from our data variable from that event handler. And then we did the exact same, just referencing. We didn't have to touch the HTML file at all. Didn't have to touch that template file at all. We just did the same kind of referencing of the scope variable in our layout file to display that in PyVision. All right, what questions do we have kind of on the event handler or getting PyData itself into a symbol?
Just got one. What's dictating the frequency for the onData update trigger? Is that something?
So that's hard-coded in PyVision side of things at once every 5 seconds. If you need it more frequently, you could potentially use like stream updates or channels with the web API and kind of call it directly and get it more frequent updates. But that's something that's been written into PyVision itself. Yes, in the back.
Sorry, you guys showed me the configuration pane that changed what tag is associated with that.
I am not, unfortunately, no.
What was the question?
So the question was, how are we going to show just making configuration panes for PyVision for custom symbols? So on a lot of kind of native PyVision symbols, when you right-click on them, you have the option to kind of format value or add these other configurations to them, and it'll pop up a pane on the right-hand side. We aren't going to be going through this. I'm sorry. Didn't realize this wasn't showing you. He's asking about that right-hand side pane. There is a way to do that in PyVision Extensibility. You need another additional file that's just sym dash your symbol name dash config, and that'll help it reference the same symbols, and you can use that to create your own configuration pane as needed.
I assume you would need that if you wanted to look at multiple Py tags, like you have multiple inputs to the symbol.
So the question is, do you need this to add multiple Py tags to the symbol? No. Like if you had a trend, you could theoretically just kind of keep adding things to it, but it wouldn't allow you to kind of alter the configuration, the look of the symbol, beyond whatever the base is that you've created. Yes?
Going back to the question about Angular, so once it moves to PyVision 4.x and then the later versions of Angular, will the code that you write break or have to be rewritten to work?
Of course, yeah. So the question is, once PyVision 4.x is released and we're moving to a newer version of Angular, will a lot of the code need to be rewritten? And the question is, the answer kind of depends on what your symbol is. A lot of the actual symbol itself, anything that's valid JavaScript is also valid TypeScript and should be available in Vision 4.x. There's going to be a little bit of changing about how you kind of move data from the TypeScript file and kind of the layout file in the newer version. I know this has kind of been something discussed among the developers as far as putting out some kind of migration, not necessarily tool, but guide for moving things over. But there's good odds that 90 to 95% of your code that's already valid, as long as there's not anything incredibly complex, should still be valid in the newer version. You should be able to migrate them over without too much of an issue. Yes?
What about CSS if you want to do your own custom CSS?
So you can do your own custom CSS as well. For the most part, I tend to just modify style attributes on the HTML tags in the template file. But you could, yeah, you could do your own style, like CSS styling sheets if you wanted. All right, any other questions? OK. So next topic I wanted to talk about is leveraging third-party libraries. So this kind of obviously varies from third party to third party because everyone does things kind of their own way. In this one, I'm going to talk about what our most commonly used ones are, or most commonly used one is, which is AmCharts. And I'll be going through an example of that. So this, as I kind of already alluded to, in order to use third-party libraries, you need to have the JavaScript files themselves available to PyVision in that ext folder, in that extensibility folder. For the example I'm doing, that's going to just be kind of AmCharts.js and serial.js. From there, we need to create a container for an AmCharts object, and that's going to happen in our HTML file. We're going to have to create an AmCharts object to put in that container. That's going to happen in our logic file. We're going to do a little bit of configuration for that AmCharts object, and as well as do any data conversions to make it acceptable kind of to that AmCharts object as well, so that it can consume. All right. So let's see if we can get rid of this over here. So AmCharts itself. Let's go back just to kind of the home page here. AmCharts is a website that has their own kind of JavaScript libraries for visualization tools. If you want to take a look at what they have kind of this demos button up here in the right-hand corner. There are a few different versions of AmCharts. For this demo, I'm going to be using AmCharts version 3, which is not the most recent. But because they're still kind of actively developing AmCharts 4, I found it kind of easier and more consistent to use 3 for the moment. But you can see all of the different AmCharts they have sort of available and the different visualizations you could potentially use and make available to PyVision. But these are all AmCharts 4 demos, as it kind of mentions in the upper left-hand corner here. But if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, if we're looking for AmCharts 3 demos, we can also find that as well. And then it has the similar sort of layout of all of the different pre-configured AmCharts charts that are available. If we click on one of them, and we find the one I'm looking for. So I'm just going to do date-based data, because that's a lot of what the Pi system is kind of time-based data. You can take a look at how the symbol is actually going to appear. This is an actual AmChart symbol that's rendered in the HTML here. And kind of on the bottom half of the page here, it has the source code for it. So what it's using to actually render the symbol itself, they've made that object to hold the AmChart, that chart div here. It will also tell you which JavaScript files that it's loading in. So AmCharts.js and serial.js, as well as the configuration for the AmChart itself, which is just kind of a very large JavaScript object with the type, the theme, what all the values are in that symbol itself. You can download these libraries, although they do come with a little bit of watermark if you're not paying for the libraries themselves. But you can download the libraries, and as I kind of alluded to earlier, I've already went ahead and downloaded them for us, just because I didn't want to have to rely on some of the Wi-Fi here. But up on the downloads page up top here, you can download the AmCharts 3 libraries. So those libraries, I've went ahead and put in our ext folder, just so that they can be loaded up. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and create a new symbol rather than trying to recycle our simple value here. So we'll go back to that kind of boilerplate code over here, copy that, and make a new file. I'll go ahead and give it a new name. All right, and then the second thing we need to do, same with our simple value symbol, we need a template file to actually hold onto the AmChart object itself. Oh, misplaced that quote. 1 second. And then, as you probably noticed, I've been doing a lot of just clicking on the original JavaScript file name and then slightly modifying it to add that template.html. And that's just so I'm not, messing up the symbol names here. All right. So this is going to be a little bit more complex than we kind of did in the previous ones. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of different steps towards creating those AmChart objects. So first one, downloading the libraries and making them available to Vision by putting them in that extensibility folder. We did that. 2, create some kind of container to hold our AmCharts chart itself. So now we're on step 3, which is actually creating that chart itself, and then we can create the configuration for it. So I tend to give it these, well, let me finish typing, and then we can, I'll talk a little bit more about the code. So this first piece of, this first line here, all it's doing is saying, I want to create a variable, and that variable is going to be finding the object on the page that has the label container. So I've given this kind of HTML file, I've given the template file an ID with container. So this symbol container div, all it's doing is just kind of getting a handle on that object on the HTML object itself, so that we can then kind of put stuff into it in a moment. The second thing I want to do is give it a unique ID. For PyVision symbols, you noticed in that data update that there was an actual symbol name there, which was symbol 0 in the case of our simple value. But for this, we kind of need to create it ourselves because for this, we need to create just kind of our own unique ID ourselves so we can kind of keep a handle on that itself. And by doing that, I'm just going to be using kind of a random number generator in JavaScript to get just kind of a unique GUID for us. I like to label it with serial or bar or whatever kind of style chart it is beforehand. Just to make it a little bit easier to identify. All right. Next thing we need to do is actually get some kind of config for our symbol. I'm going to, just to kind of keep things a little bit neater, I'm going to go ahead and say our chart config is going to equal some function getConfig that I have yet to write. We'll get back to that in a moment. And then our chart is going to be, we're going to be able to leverage AmCharts. That AmCharts library, that JavaScript file that we've put into the ext folder, will now allow us to call an AmCharts function called makeChart. And the function's arguments are just going to be some kind of unique ID, which we've given, or which we've created, and some kind of chart config. So.
Can you just scroll down a bit so to see the more?
Pardon?
Can you just scroll down a bit so we'll see the more?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep, thanks.
Oh, there we go. And then the chart config. So how are we actually going to get kind of this nebulous getConfig function? Just as kind of for starters, every time I create a new one from scratch, I like to just copy and paste whatever the actual chart config from the AmCharts website is on their demo page, just to get things started, and then modify it from there. So I already have that and a little cheat sheet file here, make my life easy. And with it comes a little bit of fake data. And so we're going to go ahead and just kind of use that fake data for the moment. Yeah, back from 2012 here. But kind of scrolling up to the top, we're going to use that serial type graph, and then just kind of the rest of the configuration I've pulled from AmCharts itself just to kind of get things started. And once you have the symbol up and running, feel free to kind of make changes to this as needed to make it look like what you want. All right. So now just to kind of recap, we downloaded those files, made them available to PyVision. We've created an object in our template file to hold a AmCharts chart. We kind of got a handle on that AmCharts chart itself, and then we're going to call an AmCharts function, makeChart, to put that kind of pre-made configuration from the demo into that AmChart. And then, similar to what we did before, we're going to get this working with fake data, and then we're going to try and substitute in some actual like Pi data for this symbol. So we've got this saved. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. We'll open up PyVision again. And then, because we've now added a new symbol here, we're going to go ahead and do another kind of hard reload from cache to get it to load up that new symbol. That's fine by me. All right, so I have a couple of already existing AmChart serial ones here from previous runs of this, but we were on AmChart serial 2. And again, need to give it some kind of tag, even though we're using fake data, just to get the symbol on here. All right. One moment. Looks like I have some kind of syntax error. This is why we have cheat sheets. OK. That's probably what happened as I dropped a bar there. Yeah.
Is there a log anywhere that would have shown you like an error?
That's OK. So that's sort of what I was looking at in the developer tools here. A lot of the times, if there's some kind of error with your symbol, the console will pop up with some sort of log that says, you know, this isn't quite right. Although unfortunately here, it looks like it's just not like rendering it at all. So we'll give this one more shot. All right. Not quite sure why this isn't working offhand. I'll take a look into it after the fact and add some notes for the recording. But just to kind of keep us rolling. Yeah, I'll show the other one in a moment. But just to kind of, keep us rolling. The other symbol. Yeah. So for this one, I've kind of already done the final part of it of actually adding in sinusoid data itself. But we can render this kind of visually in PyVision itself and have that load in. And you'll notice kind of on the upper right here that JS chart by AmCharts, kind of that little watermark because we're using the free version of all the JavaScript files itself. So just to kind of recap. We went ahead and downloaded those JavaScript libraries and put them in the ext folder to make them available. We made a container for that AmCharts object. We created an AmCharts object itself with that AmCharts.makeChart function. And then we took the configuration kind of from that demo on the AmChartsJS website to just kind of create a sample chart. And then again, I've got sort of the code here. In this one, I have a little bit of styling just to make sure it fills up the whole symbol. But yeah, create a container for the AmCharts object in the layout file. Create an AmCharts object itself to put in the container, and then got a configuration. And I know, again, this is kind of small text for the screen here. We use that AmCharts editor to just kind of get a sample configuration to get in there. So the next step to this is actually getting PyData into AmChart symbols. Because I was having a little bit of issues with sort of the existing symbol, I'm going to go ahead and show you sort of what the final symbol's code looks like.
Did you create an actual template to show the data in this case?
I'm sorry?
Did you create a template file in this case for the AmChart serial 2?
Yes. Yes. So each there's an actual AmChart serial 2 here. That was the container that. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize the visuals weren't synced up. My mistake. So yeah, we did actually create a container file, that template file for AmChart serial 2.
So do you need to like reference the JavaScripts in here in this file, or is it automatically done?
It should be automatically done. Yeah. So I can show you what we have for our the symbol we do have up there. So the symbol that I am using is, I believe, that AmChart serial 1, which is just kind of a template file here. And again, that styling just to make sure it takes up the whole width of that HTML object. In the JavaScript file, kind of going back to the AmCharts configuration here, we have the data provider, which is right now where it would be getting that data from, just from that configuration. It's pulling from this data provider. But if we wanted to put in PyData into an AmChart symbol, we'd need to just replace this variable with our own data. So to do that, we kind of take bits and pieces from our previous symbol, from that simple value. We make this same this.onDataUpdate function. We make that same event handler. In that function, we say, if there's data, we want to take that data and make a new data provider. We want to have new data provider going into that AmCharts chart itself. And then we just kind of set the AmCharts data provider equal to that newly kind of converted data. Insofar as the data for coming in from Pi, because in this case, we don't want just a single value. We don't just want whatever the snapshot is. We want a little bit more. We want some time series data. For the PyVision symbol itself, we can do a change of what the data shape is. So there are a couple of different, there's this concept of data shapes with PyVision and symbols kind of generally, of having either single values or a stream of values or kind of XY data for each symbol. Because we want just kind of a time series set of data, we want 8 hours or 12 hours worth of data. The data shape we want to use is time series, and there are a number of kind of different explanations and how they look described in a lot of the documentation. But time series allows us to get a number of values, kind of whatever the span of the actual PyVision display is. We take that, and then we kind of convert that function. We convert that data into how AmCharts is expecting to look at it, which is this array of time and value pairs, or date and value pairs up here. So for every new value that we get in here, every value we get from Pi, we just want to create a new date value pair, put that into our data provider, and then give that back to AmCharts to make our chart. And then all this does, chart.validateData, is, hey, re-render the chart if our data provider has changed values. So this is just kind of a quick way of saying, whenever we get a new update, try and re-render the chart if necessary. So once we've done that, we kind of get the end result that I already showed you here. PyVision, or AmCharts chart in PyVision, but with sinusoid data rather than kind of that fake data that comes with the demo. And one of the nice things about AmCharts, at least I think, is for those of you who, I don't know, maybe need to look at the screen a little bit closer, they have these nice little pop-ups here, and you can see the exact value that's showing up. But there's a lot of little nifty tools in AmCharts, Pareto charts, and all sorts of other things for if you want to visualize your data a little bit differently and don't want to have to go kind of back and reinvent the wheel. All right. So I know we went through a lot there. And kind of the last slide here is just that actual nebulous sort of hand-waving of convert whatever is coming in from that event handler into a format that AmCharts can take. And again, this kind of varies from third party to third party because everyone's expecting data in a different way. And this might take a little bit of trial and error to kind of get it into the correct JSON format or whatever format it's looking for. Yeah, like I said, I know we went through a lot there. So what questions do you guys have about either trying to use third-party libraries or massaging data to get it into those third-party libraries to kind of display?
Can you quickly explain how to convert this to use more than one tag instead of just one?
Sure. So the question was, how do we convert things to use more than one tag rather than just one? So in the PyVision symbol itself, one of the configuration options that you have available to you, I'm sorry about that. Thank you. In the configuration file, into that logic file itself, one of the configurations you have for the symbol is this data source behavior. So right now, we have it set as data source behavior is single, which means it accepts only a single tag. We could change this to make it multiple.
How many options do you have? Can I see?
So there's really only two available to you, is single and multiple. There's an option that's none, but that's kind of for internal use, and if you use it, your symbol won't load in. But yeah, all you'd need to do is just change that data source behavior from single to multiple. But kind of as a result, you'd want to take a look. You'd want to log that data object into the console just to kind of see what it looks like, because it's going to be in a different shape than before. So by changing both the data shape here, or by changing how many tags that it accepts, you're going to be altering how that data comes in from PyVision, and you'll need to maybe change it a little bit to kind of accept multiple tags. All right, yes?
How would you accept AF data versus PyTags?
Unfortunately, I don't have my AF database here crawled right now, but it'd be the exact same process of being able to drag and drop that symbol using an AF attribute rather than a PyTag. And I believe I have an example in the slides of AF data being shown, if I'm not mistaken. No, that is my PyTag. OK. But kind of from this PyTag, rather than seeing path being py : whack whack, you'd see AF and then that attribute path.
Can you send data to Py?
Can you send data to Py? Natively in PyVision, no. But if you wanted to make HTTP requests, you can do exactly that. So the PyWeb API allows you to post data to it. So if you had a symbol or a toolpane that made post to the PyWeb API, you can do exactly that. And you led me perfectly into the thing I wanted to talk about, actually, which is tomorrow, Anna Perry, who's a coworker of mine, has a lab. I know a number of you might be registered, but is exactly that, a manual data entry symbol for PyVision extensibility. And you guys are going to be just creating it from scratch for those of you who have already registered for the lab. And if I'm not mistaken, those are recorded too, so you could probably go back and take a look at that as well.
And is it a custom thing, or it's in the new release it is coming as a product?
No, it's a custom symbol. Yes?
What are your recommendation was for doing step-through debugging? Are you going through Chrome's debugging all the time, or are you using Visual Studio for those that are using this? And I know that there's a lot more. When you say like Angular, right, there's a bigger discussion around, does this thing, can you generate builds off of it so that you could have transpiling things down from
AngularJS 6, ES5. Like, there's a bigger discussion there, but just this part of how do y'all debug when you make these things? When you want to like put some breakpoints in your code,
Yeah.
how do you do it?
So the question was, how do you go about debugging these things? The question kind of varies upon what sort of the problem is. Honestly, when I was getting started with this, and still even to this day, a lot of what I'll do is just do like those console.log functions just all over the place and kind of log all of that to the console because it's very, very easy to get done. The other thing you could potentially do is in DevTools over here, you have the option to kind of look at the source code and what's actually being loaded up. Although it becomes problematic because a lot of this is what they call minified, and it's pretty hard to take a look at. So let's see if we can get this to show up a bit better. Yeah, so a lot of this is kind of minified code that gets put into here. So you'll see like I.this or var s, and that's not super helpful as far as namings. You can unminify the code in IIS, although that's sort of independent of us. There are debug settings that allow you to send over the exact like raw text files that are being loaded up from the folders themselves. And that makes everything a little bit slower, but if you're debugging, maybe it's worth it. So I'll occasionally do that and do like a quick console to log right at the top when it's rendering the symbol, and then use that as kind of my marker, find it in the file, and then set breakpoints from there. Although, again, this is just personal preference. I've found that to be kind of difficult to run through, and I prefer to just like log outputs to console rather than stepping through it in Chrome tools. But yes.
During session yesterday over Vision,
Yes.
it looked like there was some a roadmap or in development to make some of manual entry easier. Is that something that we still would have to do through this process if we want to do manual entry, or is that something they're going to do in kind of native PyVision?
Okay, so the question was, is manual entry going to be kind of native to PyVision? And to be honest, I'm not involved enough with the roadmap to really know about that. I personally haven't heard anything about that, but don't take that as like kind of God's word on sort of where the roadmap is for PyVision in general. All right, yes?
Are there a lot of repositories and things that have already built extensibility stuff?
Yes, there in fact are. So the question was, is there already repositories for custom-built symbols? And the answer is yes. OSIsoft has a public-facing GitHub repository of kind of custom symbols that have already been created under GitHub OSIsoft, and then the repo is PyVision custom symbols. The ones that have been built by OSIsoft ourselves, or by OSIsoft employees, we have some tutorials here, but under community samples, we have OSIsoft. These are a whole bunch of symbols that have been created by a number of systems engineers over the years for customers who have particular use cases, and we wanted to make them available. And you'll notice there's half a dozen or a dozen AmCharts ones that are already there. So but back before XY plots existed, people wanted them, and we made them out of AmCharts. You could do audible alerts if you need something to ping whenever a particular condition is met. SQC trends, kind of so on and so forth. And I highly, highly encourage you, if you come up with something that you find is very interesting and you want to be able to share it with the community, posts on PySquare or requests to add it to this GitHub, I strongly, strongly encourage. It kind of helps all of us from, again, not having to start from scratch and reinvent the wheel when we're coming up with custom symbols. All right, yes?
The process book to PyVision conversion.
Yes.
If I have a custom symbol on the book,
Mm-hmm.
is it permanently convert? Do I need to write it?
It's my understanding that, so the question was, do custom symbols for process book, so I assume you mean like VBA controlled objects. Are those going to automatically have some kind of JavaScript conversion with the process book to PyVision migration tool? And my understanding is no, that you'd still need to create kind of that custom object again if you have like VBA backing it. So I do have one kind of small other thing I want to show you guys, since we have a little bit of time left. And sometimes I've been running through this presentation, I have time, and other times I don't. So using built-in Angular providers. So kind of what are AngularJS providers? AngularJS has this concept of providers that are resources that can be injected, for lack of a better phrase, into components or into symbols that can be kind of used across all of them. And you can kind of use them as a service if you're unfamiliar. But this allows you to take advantage of some built-in Angular tools that I haven't kind of shown you in these examples so far. But you can access, the big one is like HTTP requests. I kind of alluded to getting data from other sources, or getting data from like the PyWeb API, something you guys might already use. You can use these to get data from other symbols and kind of leverage some of Angular's built-in power. As far as building your own provider, that's vastly outside the scope of this talk, but if you wanted to, you could potentially build your own kind of native things and have that injected, or build your own custom providers and have that injected into PyVision as well. So how to use providers in PyVision. You have sort of the same initial code block, the same kind of standard boilerplate code. The only thing you need to add is one small line in our kind of boilerplate code, which is this inject. And it takes an array of Angular providers, or your own custom providers if you write your own custom AngularJS providers. So for here, we're just taking like the HTTP AngularJS provider, which allows you to make HTTP calls to other services on the web. Once you've added it to the definition, you can then kind of use it in different functions if you add it as a parameter, as a function parameter here. So I have it added to my initialization function. There are a number of ones that are available. So HTTP is kind of a standard one. Q is also helps in handling asynchronous requests. Animate and interval are a handful of other ones. But these are all kind of native AngularJS providers, and you can find documentation on them through AngularJS's website. So originally I was going to have some live coding for this as well. But again, I found myself consistently running over in practice, but now I wish I had. Insofar as using them, like I said, you can inject them as part of the symbol definition, add them to asynchronous functions, add them to your initialization function, then kind of use that as part of that function itself. I'm going to go ahead and kind of skip over a little bit of this. This is just kind of demonstrating asynchronous functions with Q. But I imagine you guys are a little more interested in using this with the PyWeb API. So PyVision has some kind of, I don't want to say hidden, but not as visible client settings. One of them being the PyWeb API's URL. So you can get a handle on the PyWeb API using, in any system whatsoever. You don't have to like hard code a URL. It's always available in these client settings here, and you can use that to get the PyWeb API's URL to kind of make requests to it. When you want to use the HTTP provider, the AngularJS's HTTP provider, there's a handful of sort of portions of it. You can use gets, get request, which is just let me see the information there. And then there's two possible kind of responses from that. Either you have a success and you use .then to kind of indicate what you do with that success, that 200 response, that good response from the web API, or you have an error and you kind of do whatever you want with the error. But that, in kind of tomorrow's lab with Anna Perry, she's going to be using that HTTP provider and making post requests to the PyWeb API so you can post manual data to the PyWeb API and kind of get that manual data right back through a custom symbol. Yeah. So that's kind of all I have presented, or all I have kind of prepared. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't have a custom symbol kind of example written up for this already. But if you guys have any questions, I'm here for the next 20 minutes. I've got plenty of time, and I'm happy to answer anything. All right, cool. Thank you.